Okay, you should be able to do that.
Yep, I see that. And I'll just wait till after we get going. So.
Okay. Like we have a lot of people still coming in. Okay, I'm just going to get started and go through the opening stuff, and that'll give people a few more minutes to come and join us. So hi, and welcome to OFMA's Spring 2021 seminar on the rules and regulations for COVID-19 safety at farmers markets. With the main season right around the corner, we began hearing from you guys with questions about how to interpret the latest rules, and we thought we'd get everyone together again for a recap and update on COVID safety measures. So in just a few minutes, we're going to hear from Isaak Stapleton. He's the Director of Food Safety, Animal Health and ID programs at the Oregon Department of Agriculture. He'll be sharing the key points farmers markets need to understand for this year. That'll be followed up by Q&A and what you want to share out from your markets, which will be facilitated by OFMA's board president, Anna Hipsman-Springer. She's also a vendor at some of your markets from Little Starts. And also we have Rebecca Landis, market director for the Corvallis Albany Farmers Markets on the line, and she's working with OFMA this year to do ongoing policy analysis around COVID and help keep our guidance for you current and accurate. But before we get started on the presentation, just want to run through a few pointers for this session. We are recording this workshop and we'll be posting it to OFMA's website for anyone to watch again later. Please feel free to lighten your online Zoom time and turn your camera off if you don't want to be on camera. Always check that your mic is muted. As I said, we'll begin with hearing from Isaak and then we'll have Q&A after. So if you have a question before the Q&A and don't want to forget it, please just submit it through the chat box. Anna and Rebecca will be collecting these for Isaak to answer later. And if you're having any tech issues with this, you can send those through the chat box to me, Amanda, and I'll help you out with that too. And then one more thing while I've got you all here, I also want to highlight our 2 workshops coming up in April. We hope you can make these as well. They're just as important to your market operations as handling this pandemic. So go online to OFMA's website, OregonFarmersMarkets.org, to see the full description of these events and register, or check out recordings of some of the past workshops. We've been doing a bunch of them all this winter, and we have recordings and materials from all of those posted under the past proceedings. So now I'm going to turn this over to Isaak.
Great. Thank you. Excuse me. Those 2 workshops look fantastic, by the way. Very timely topics. So maybe I'll have to look those up after you guys have those. So as Amanda said, I'm the director for the Food Safety and Animal Health Program area for the Department of Agriculture. So glad to be back talking to you guys again this year. Unfortunately, it's still about COVID stuff because we're still continuing to deal with that. But with the increased timeline on vaccines, I think that's a positive sign overall. So what I thought I would do today is walk through the OHA guidance that really impacts farmers markets and try and help you guys understand that, interpret it for your markets. We're kind of in that weird spot as the Department of Ag where we don't directly regulate farmers markets. We are responsible for food safety within the state, but there isn't you all fall under the exemption for farmers markets from licensing and some of our regulations. So we're kind of here more as a resource for you all. I'm gonna share my screen here, and hopefully you've all looked at this document or at least somewhat aware of it. OHA has made some updates and changes to it. The last update was March 12th, so fairly recent updates, and they've made some decent changes since November, I think was the last time we talked, or maybe it was October. Um, it's hard to remember these days. Um, but so I wanted to kind of tie this together because the retail guidance document is really the key document that you all should be paying attention to and looking at those specific requirements that are listed in there for your operations and implementing those. And then this document ties in with all the other related documents. So there's multiple other guidances that will pertain to a farmer's market based off of this key document, and we can go through some of those. So I've highlighted some of the sections just to kind of draw attention to them as I go through. Um, so like you see in the top piece here, it does apply to farmers markets, and OHA has put in a definition of farmers markets, which OFMA helped them craft to make it very clear what a farmer's market was. And I think that was much appreciated by the state reopening team that developed this document. They rely on experts, and so that was great for that partnership there. The other piece that's important to note as we go through the document, that indoor and outdoor markets, farmers markets are included in that kind of overall definition, because there is a separate section within this document that talks about that, and it adds some additional requirements that are different than your bricks and mortar standard, retail grocery store. And, we don't make the guidance. We did provide comment on some of this stuff that may be you may have some questions about. And so I may not totally have the answers about why they chose to do certain requirements or not, but I can try and field this as we go through and do my best. Let's see. So this is the page here that really points you back to all the other things that you have to comply with outside of this document. So retail stores are required to, and then all of these bullets. And if you see all those multiple links, retail stores have to comply with the statewide mask, face covering, and face shield guidance document. So you would go there. That document talks about requiring all of your staff to wear masks, and requiring all customers that are in your facility or at your market to wear masks at all times. It also talks about what is an appropriate face covering or face mask. I've seen some folks out there who don't maybe necessarily agree with face masks wearing the mesh ones. Like it's literally just a piece of mesh on your face, and that's not qualified as a face covering or face mask. And they list that in that document. It also talks about, being required to post signs about face coverings being worn in the facility. The limited max capacity based on designated risk level. So that would take you to the various county risk levels. And within that document, it shows you what the max capacity is given what your specific county's risk level is. So I think low is 75% of capacity, and extreme, I should probably know what extreme is. It talks about in extreme counties, on-site indoor food consumption is prohibited, so that can't happen. I know one question came up before this about live performances, was asked to me, so it's listed here. So I know a lot of times farmers markets, you guys have performers come in and provide music for the market. That's fine. The key thing that you'll want to remember in that is that if you start to provide seating for the performance, that kicks you into a different guidance document for entertainment. And you don't want to do that because it adds additional restrictions and requirements on you. So as long as you are not providing a place for customers to congregate and sit and attend a concert, so to speak, you won't fall under that, as long as they're just providing kind of ambiance for the market and entertainment just in general. That's fine. Let's see. So there's still like the frequently clean and sanitized work areas, high traffic areas. That is going to get further defined in the indoor outdoor section that we'll get to here in a second. And then they always, in all of these documents, they have, to the extent possible, or we recommend, but you're not required to, pieces. And those are, if they fit for your market operation or your situation, they're great mitigation factors that could be used, should be used, but you're not gonna, see any type of enforcement around that. And maybe that's a good spot for me to pause and talk about enforcement really quick before we go on. So enforcement of these requirements really falls down to the local public health authorities and Oregon OSHA, where there are employee impacts related to compliance with these requirements. So if it's a situation that is, say you're not requiring your employees to wear face coverings, that's a direct risk to an employee. And so OSHA may get involved in that. But if it's one of these other requirements around, posting clear signs, that would be a local public health authority that would come in and say, hey, you're not posting signs, you're required to post signs. You need to do that. And all of that stuff is going to be complaint based. They don't have people out monitoring retail stores, farmers markets, things like that. It's really if someone says, hey, this farmers market over here is doing nothing. They're not enforcing physical distancing. They're not enforcing masks. I don't, you need to go check them out. Then that would trigger either local public health or Oregon OSHA to come and ask you some questions about what protocols you have in place. So yeah, they talk about one-way flow. That doesn't work when you have open markets necessarily, and we have seen people don't always comply with that. I think the Salem Saturday Market, which I attend on a regular basis, they have directional signs, and you see people kind of milling both directions, and it's a nice to have. It's not a required to. So it's up to you how much you want to enforce that for your customers and how much that's going to be a friction point for you and your customers coming through the market. So just something to think about. But this next section is where they added some additional requirements basically for farmers markets and any of those other outdoor market type activities that we see that are seasonal on farm type of activities, whether that's, well, the thing that comes to mind mostly is pumpkin patches and things like that. That's obviously in the fall kind of an issue, but so they added these additional sections for indoor outdoor markets. And on-site food consumption needs to be a delineated area. So you need to have a designated food court that's marked off to say this is the food court. And then you have to comply with those eating and drinking establishment rules for that area. So tables 6 feet apart. I think we could click on the link, but parties no larger than 10 in the same party, those types of requirements. And then obviously some of that relates to the county risk level that you're in. So you need to make sure you pay attention to that. And as it changes, adjust your market. Hopefully we're all changing for the better and moving to the lower risks, and we stay that way. That's the goal. But if your county did move up back into a higher risk category, you would need to make adjustments for if you had a food court or the things that you were doing. So one of the things that's not required for, say, a bricks and mortar, but that is for outdoor markets is this 1 to 50 ratio for a physical distancing monitor. And so for every 50 individuals, not customers, but people within a market, you need to have a physical distancing monitor that is monitoring capacity limits and looking at enforcing whether or not people are staying, 6 feet apart and not congregating in areas and things like that. So my understanding is that's probably a challenge for a lot of market managers because you have slow times and you have busy times. One thing we did pose to OHA as a question was, well, if we are requiring each one of our vendors to act as a physical distancing monitor throughout the market, does that count? And they said yes, if that person is responsible for the whole marketplace, um, and is doing that monitoring all over. But if you have, I mean, I don't know how many vendors a typical market has, but if you've got 30 vendors and they're all monitoring where they're at in the market at all times as a physical distancing monitor, it seems reasonable that you have the entire place covered. It's not up to that one person to make sure they're monitoring the whole area. You have a team of people that is doing that. So I think you would be safe to go with that type of a model. Yeah, you have to remove any and restrict standing areas where people are congregating and not staying physically distant. So I guess maybe think about your entertainment areas if you have people playing music or other things, making sure people aren't all congregating and standing in that area. That would be particularly one of the things that you would want one of your monitors to do. And then you also need to have at least one sanitation attendant whose duty it is to clean restrooms hourly in the marketplace, make sure there's adequate supplies in them, and then also someone to clean and disinfect high traffic areas. So the retail stores, they have to make sure that they're doing that. This has the added requirement that it needs to be at a particular frequency, and you have to have a person dedicated to it. So if someone walked up to you and said, "Who's your person?" you need to say, it's Isaac. He's our designated person that's cleaning the bathrooms right now, or whatever that happens to be. And it can be the same person that does both of those jobs. It doesn't need to be two different people, but it needs to be someone that is designated. And they can do other duties too. In their first draft, they said that it had to be their sole duty. That's the only thing they did, which we pointed out wasn't quite reasonable. And they agreed that, okay, yeah, that makes sense. They can be monitoring, they can be cleaning bathrooms, they can be wiping surfaces, they can be helping people find a particular booth, whatever it happens to be for customer service. So that kind of covers the highlights of this document. There's some additional resources here at the bottom that they point to for signs and things like that. So that's kind of what I wanted to run over. If you guys don't have this downloaded on your computers, I would highly recommend that you do it and just kind of have it at hand. I know OFMA has a great COVID resource document that we can talk through some of the FAQs in there too if we want, that you can use as a reference, and I think this is linked in there also. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions.
This is Anna. I'm going to start with a couple questions that came up in the chat. Namely, let's see, Liz asked, why is the physical distancing officer requirement different for markets than for retail grocery stores?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not one that I really probably have an adequate answer to. I'm not sure what their justification was in that space. Other than potentially that it's more of an uncontrolled open environment instead of like a bricks and mortar where you have, I don't really know. I'm frankly guessing at what their justification was. It was one of the points that they weren't willing to make any adjustments or changes to, and we suggested that that was inconsistent with what bricks and mortar retail operations were required to do. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a good answer.
And I'll add to that, just from OFMA perspective, one of the things that we've worked really hard is trying to make these more similar to grocery requirements when possible. And there were some things that they were willing to budge on and some that they just really weren't. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things that we were able to accomplish with OFMA and our conversation with OHA was getting farmers markets added to retail store guidance and not kind of scattered throughout all these other things and treated differently everywhere. Granted, there are some things that are different in this document, but I think that was definitely a positive thing that we were able to accomplish.
Thank you, Isaac. We have a question about sampling from Hillary. Hillary, do you want to just say your question?
Sure. So I'm just a little confused. Is sampling permitted? And if so, how do we hold that? Is it treated as on-site consumption and sort of fall under that? You need to go over here and be, cordoned off to do sampling, or how would that work?
Yeah, so sampling is allowed as long as you are not in a high-risk county. If you're in a high risk, no on-site consumption can occur. So if you're still in one of those counties, you can't do sampling. But if you're in any of the other ones, you can. There was a prior requirement that the sample had to be served in a sealed container with a lid. That's no longer required. So samples can be, just in a little paper cup or however people want to present them. But they do have to be handed out. So there's still no self-service. So you can't just put a tray for anybody to come grab. You would just be handing out your samples. And then for the consumption, you just have to look at the on-site consumption section, and we can maybe pull that up and dive into that.
I mean, so like if I get a sample of something as the shopper, then do I have to take it and go to a designated on-site consumption area before I consume it, or leave the market to consume it? No.
Yeah, but I believe that's the case, but I want to dive back maybe through this eating and drinking establishments one, and maybe it might even be in the self-service guidance.
Okay.
Give us a little more clear direction on that. I think the safest bet is to say, like, great, here's your sample. We have our food court over here. Like, if you want to consume it on site, is probably your best option. But
you couldn't do that with alcohol, of course.
Correct. Alcohol still has to stay within the designated consumption area. So if you have an alcohol permit, all of those alcohol tastings have to be consumed within that permitted boundaried area. But if it's food, that's a little more flexible, because you don't have a permit.
Okay.
Hey, Isaac, we got a comment that you might be getting a little far away from your microphone.
Oh,
Some
sorry.
people are having a hard time hearing you.
I think those are the bigger questions from the chat. Do folks have other questions?
Hi, yeah, I missed the part on, it was like saying about the cafeteria for the prepared food. Do we have to have that, or is that by choice?
So what was the question? Do you have to have a cafeteria for prepared?
You were talking about like a sitting area for people that, are eating food. Is that required, or can they walk off site to eat?
They can walk off site to eat, but if you have food vendors on site, you have to have like a designated eating area. So think you have your food trucks, your food pods, and if you're going to have seating available for people to sit down and consume it, that has to be a designated area, and it has to follow the eating and drinking requirements guidance documents. So your tables have to be spaced as a particular distance. Tables have to be cleaned, following that guidance between customers, things like that.
Okay, so just clarity, they can't walk around with food.
Correct.
Other questions?
I just had a quick question regarding the alcohol vendors with the sampling and everything. Do all the alcohol vendors need to be near one another, or can they be spaced out throughout the market?
That is a question for OLCC and their permit group. If somebody knows the answer, feel free to pipe up. It looks like Rebecca might.
Yeah, so we have maybe two different models going on in markets. They're probably, Ginger probably could speak to the one that I'm not familiar with, but for for a market in the middle and smaller sizes like mine, there may be one or two vendors who have an SEW permit, and that's just for the area of their booth. But we only have wine and a few things scattered, so we don't need an area. But maybe Ginger could unmute and talk about what she has at her market.
We keep all our alcohol vendors together, but that's just because before COVID, we actually had it licensed so you could buy a cocktail or a glass of wine. But in times where I may typically have 10 or 12 alcohol vendors at a time, but if I have less than that, I'll mix them in with the market. They don't have, it's really just a matter of style, I think. But I have never seen anything from the OLCC saying that they have to be together. That's just our choice.
Go ahead.
I think that there was somebody had a question about if there was anything specific that needs to be done to clean the bathrooms. I think we might have missed that, getting that one answered, and I think.
So for cleaning and sanitizing, you need to use an approved product that cleans and disinfects for COVID. So you just need to follow that product directions for use and make sure you're using an appropriate product. So simply water alone wouldn't be appropriate, right? You would have to be actually using a disinfectant product.
And we have a question from Sage. Sage, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I was just reviewing that document that Isaac, you were reading, and it says that live performers are, for live performances, ensure that performer is at least 6 feet away from customers, and that live performers are included in the maximum capacity limit. So I was just a little unclear on if they were allowed in any risk level or in only certain risk levels.
No, I think, and if you, oh no, that's a good point. I think you're right. I think it is allowed at any level, but you end up with restrictions of the number of people. So if you go to the risk level section for outdoor entertainment establishments, which is what you would fall into if you started having seating and selling tickets and things like that, your max capacity for high risk is 50 people. So that would be pretty restrictive for that. So yeah, in any other situation, it just is your max capacity for your overall establishment. So I'm going to retail service. So it'd be 50% of your total capacity for the market is what you would fall into for high risk, but you still would be allowed to have live entertainment with the conditions around live entertainment, keeping the performers 6 feet apart and 6 feet from the people listening and things like that.
Isaac, I want to clarify that if you do the seating and you fall under those other guidelines, then you get into this whole other capacity thing. And the formulas that we have given so far in the web don't apply to that. At first I thought it was way more restrictive, but it sounded like they're allowing 5 square feet per person, and then you can have 25% of the resulting figures. So could we help people with that, or do we even think there are going to be that many people that do the limited area? Or is it correct to say if there's no seating, then we just count them as people or people breathing?
If there's no seating, you just count them as members, like customers in the marketplace. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, so maybe my request for us to crank these numbers is not necessary if we don't have, but if OFMA determines that we have a number of confused people, we may come back for help.
Yeah, okay.
And I don't have numbers on, like, I don't know how many people are doing an enclosed seating area for food either. And that also has different capacities.
Right, yep, then you need to go to that eating and drinking establishments document for your food courts, like eating areas, to make sure you comply with those space limits.
So I think maybe that answers your question, Sally, but if someone, maybe Amanda or Isaac, if you have easy access to that link, if we could link it in the chat just to make it real clear. Thank you.
So which, you want the link for the county risk level guidance chart?
The eating and drinking
Okay.
establishment, food establishment, yep.
Yep, and if you go to the retail resource guide, because this has all the links in it, it's on page 2, and it's the 6th bullet down, has the eating and drinking establishments guidance document, which you can click on. So I don't know, Amanda, if you've shared out the document with everyone.
I put a link in for the retail stores one, and I'm going to go get the eating and drinking one and get that in there.
Yeah.
These are all also linked in OFMA's own resource guide doc, which I put in.
They are, but I'm going to make sure that they're called out in the right place where people would be looking for that information. I don't know if I put it right there where it should be. Hopefully I did.
And we had a question come up that has come up a number of times in OFMA about vendors who want to eat food, need to eat lunch, and how to make space for that, or how to, figure that into folks' calculations. Basically, do they need to leave the market to go eat, or like, can there be a specific area, or how?
So last year, the guidance that was put out by OHA didn't allow for on-site consumption for much of the year. And then late in the fall, the state shifted to the risk categories for each county. And that's when guidance really started to change to allow for those on-site consumption areas based on county risk level. So you need to go back and look at that at the eating and drinking establishments and relate that to what risk level you're in, and then what your max capacity is for those areas. And so you will want to designate a particular area for food consumption, and people then can get their food and consume it on site. They don't have to leave the premises to eat it, which is a much better option. Obviously, yes, I would be an unhappy customer if I got something that had to leave the market to eat it and then come back and continue shopping or something.
And so it sounds like you're saying that applies also to vendors, or would they be able to like eat in their own booths, or have a specific area that's, you could possibly set up one of those that's just for vendors?
Yeah, you could do it either way. I mean, if they're going to eat in their booths, they're going to need to make sure that, because they're no longer wearing a mask, they need to make sure that they're not closer than 6 feet to people or customers coming around their booth. So that might be a little tricky if they're going to try and do that because of the tight quarters in a lot of booths. So it would probably be best just to have any food consumption going on in the controlled area for food.
And Sage, that's a great question. Will you ask that one?
Yeah. So right now we're operating as a fresh food access point, more of like a shop and go market. And I just wanted to clarify in terms of community engagement. Can we allow community engagement beyond purchasing goods? And would community engagement include like eating, music, or like other community services that come in to do like other things?
Yeah, you can. And you can also have personal services provided as long as you follow the personal services guidance document, which I don't see directly linked actually to the retail guidance document. But by personal services, so like that's like non-therapeutic massage. So if people are setting up a massage area, then for hour massages, 50-minute massages, whatever it is, they can follow that personal services guidance as long as that booth and they are meeting all of those requirements. I will tell you that there's quite a bit of requirements around what that vendor would need to do when providing those services, but it is possible depending on what county risk level you're in. So yeah, those other community engagement pieces can definitely happen. You can have those types of people participating in your markets.
A number of questions in the chat from Sally. Are performers required to wear masks?
They are. I think if you go to the the live performer document, I'm going to open it up really quick. They are required to wear masks, and they are required to be 6 feet from one another. Although I think wind instruments, obviously, they're not wearing a mask, and there's no requirement for a mask on the end of the wind instrument.
Wait a minute, there are masks available for wind instrument players now.
Yeah, but I don't know that they're actually required in them.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think we still have some confusion around sampling also, and how folks can or can't consume that.
So sampling, again, it can be in any container now. It has to be handed out by the vendor, no self-service, no trays, just open for customers to access a sample. And then I believe it needs to be consumed in a designated food consumption area instead of just open in the market as someone's walking around. But I can take that question and get further clarification, because I don't have that right at my fingertips to say that's an absolute hard and fast rule.
I think last year when we started doing the sampling, I think if they were, since they're such small samples, it was like the alcohol one. You do it real quick, you know, it's very quick at the booth, and then you're right back with your mask, possibly. I don't know. That's kind of where
that's what we did at the Dows, is that part of the thing that our sampling vendors sign is that that folks are required to complete the sample at the booth, and then we also require that they have a waste basket to dispose of anything, so people aren't walking away with containers.
Yeah, and the alcohol absolutely does have to be consumed at the booth because of the OLCC rules.
So it sounds like perhaps we'll get a little more information and some real detailed clarity around that, and we can share it back out with folks.
Yeah, I'll work with Rebecca to make sure that that's clear in your guys' OFMA document.
Thank you. Another question, are community nonprofit groups okay? So not technically vendors in the same way, can they be present at the market?
Yes, as long as they're, you know, again, they're following all of the physical distancing rules, and you count them as part of your number of 1 to 50, they can definitely be present.
Other questions that I missed? And if something comes to you later, you can always send it to OFMA. I think probably send it to Amanda, and she will make sure it gets to the right human.
There's a question in the chat about singing.
Yeah. What did Isaac say about singing?
So my understanding is the performers need to be wearing masks. So if they're singing, I think they're technically supposed to be wearing a mask, but that would be in the outdoor entertainment establishment guidance is likely where that's addressed.
And I think as just an OFMA recommendation, I would like to say that singing is a high risk activity, and that you should take that into account in making your market level decision.
I mean, the great thing about markets is generally they're outdoors, which is a safer environment.
Did someone ask about chair massages already and how that would be conducted or not? We used to have those up until last.
Yeah, so I mentioned about the personal services that counts under chair massages. So those people providing those, there is an allowance for it. That particular vendor though has to follow the personal services guidance document, which when I briefly read through it the other day is fairly restrictive in terms of the information they have to collect about the individual who they're performing the service for. as well as document and record their own health conditions, and so that's all traceable for contact tracing purposes, I believe, with the way I read it.
It goes further. They have to like text them to come in one at a time, or you have to sit in your car. That may be, those restrictions may be difficult for some markets.
Yeah, and some of that, obviously the waiting in the car, they're primarily referring to an office or like a bricks and mortar, right, where they don't want a bunch of people sitting in a waiting room for a massage. They need to wait outside in their own vehicle. You have an open market where people can shop until, maybe their appointment is up. So you'll have to kind of work through those nuances of a bricks and mortar versus somebody in a market providing chair massages.
Who would keep the documents? Would the manager of the market, would the market actually have to keep a copy of whatever was signed, or any information share between the customer and the person getting the massage and the masseuse? Obviously no personal information, but something, a signed thing that says, I've read the COVID rules and I agree to it, sign in. I work at a school and that's what we have to do. Everyone signs in. And so I just wonder if, and we keep a record, would the market have to keep a record of that?
I don't think, when I looked at it, I don't think it's on the market to keep the records. It's on the service provider themselves. So you're just providing a space for the service provider. It's on that person to follow and keep all the records required.
And this topic kind of came up a little bit around no touch markets, and can folks touch produce or not? And I think this question is a little similar in that there are like the rules and requirements that you must follow. There's sort of OFMA kind of recommendations or places where we think markets need to make their own decisions. And one thing we also want folks to be thinking about is kind of the optics, where there are some things that maybe we know it's okay or legally it's fine, but how would folks in your community respond? And that's going to be different for every market and different for whatever community you're in. Just thinking about how folks might think about it or feel about the market if they see certain things happening or not happening.
So Anna, really quick on the no touch markets and the conversation around produce. That's one good thing to talk about. So produce does not fall under the self-service guidance. So you can walk up to a table of tomatoes and touch the tomatoes and pick out your tomatoes. That's not required to have somebody provide you with the tomato as a self-service type of a thing. So they are specifically exempt from the self-service guidance. So those produce vendors that you do have, I mean, like you mentioned, it could be up to the market what you guys want to allow or not allow, depending on your customers or your market as a whole. But you're not required to make it a no touch for produce like you are for sampling as a self-service item, if that makes sense.
Thank you. And Rebecca has put some great information into our guiding document around that and some of the factors to consider around if it makes sense for your market or particular vendors to be to have self-service for produce or to not. We have time for a few more questions if folks have them. All right, Amanda, maybe I'll hand it.
One, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
I came on a little late, so I might have missed it, but did we talk already about distancing between vendor booths, what people were doing this year, or what the rules were this year? Was there still the, however wide we did last year?
I can take that. There was never a state rule, right, Isaac, about that. What we talk about in the revised guidance document is this is, at least I hope I've said this clearly. Distance between vendors is mostly about distance between customers. Of course, you don't want a vendor to be less than 6 feet from another vendor breathing, but in practice, that almost never happens. What you need to be worried about is lines, and only you know which vendors draw what kind of lines. So you might draw up a market plan where some vendors are 5 feet apart and other vendors are 10 or more feet apart. 6 is obviously something that you want to think about. I mean, 6 is an option as well, but the thing is keeping those customer lines away from one another and manageable so that you don't go to a different part of the market and come back and find a snarl of people that shouldn't be together. So that's the planning process that I would advise people to work from.
Looks like there was people missed the part on what was decided about wearing a mask while singing, and I think that was people who are singing need to wear masks, right?
Yeah, I believe that's what the entertainment guidance document talks about. Performers must wear masks.
And also how people are handling pop clubs. So it would be that like an activity that keeps people at the market a little bit longer, possibly gathering at a booth, depending on what the kind of activity it is.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the retail guidance prohibits interactive exhibits and activities. So if you've got something where people are coming in to do, I don't know, the thing that comes to mind, because my kids used to do it pre-COVID, was like when you go to Home Depot and they have like the interactive activity for the kids to sit down and make some little wooden thing and nail and glue it together. That would be prohibited. It's an interactive activity where people would congregate together. So things like that your markets may do wouldn't be allowed.
And a number of markets have moved to kind of a grab and go model for Pop Club, where they put together kind of a little pack for kids to take with them, or for parents just to take with them back home for the kids.
Is there any required COVID screening, temperature checks or questions for vendors or anybody that the market manager needs to do?
There's no state requirement.
I have a question about on-site demo cooking. I don't know if I heard it already, but if I want a demonstration of the farmers' produce that they're cooking, how to prepare it, is there that follow along the line with the sampling, if samples are available?
So I guess tell me more about the activity. Like, how would the customers be interacting with the chef that's preparing the food?
Pretty much just watching the demonstration of, let's say, how to prepare squash and how to cook squash, and just showing. And if there would be a sampling, that would be the one that would portion cups and handing them out type of thing.
Yeah, I think
following that.
Unfortunately, I think that gets into a gray area of an interactive activity, because you're drawing people in to watch like an event, or to watch the preparing of the food and how you would do it. So that might cross into that. So I'd probably want to steer away from it, unfortunately.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a great question.
One more question, one or two more questions. And if not, I will hand it back to Amanda. Isaac, thank you so much both for being on the line here and answering all these questions. And y'all have done so much work helping us answer very detailed and very farmers market specific, nuanced questions. And we really, really appreciate it. We know that it's been constantly changing, and keeping up has been hard. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes, thanks, Isaac. And thanks all of you for being here and for wanting to run your markets in safe ways this year. Because we are done for the afternoon. I hope you have a good afternoon. If on your way out, if you want to throw something in the chat about how prepared you feel for the coming season, so we can get an idea of how helpful this was, that would be great. Otherwise, thanks everybody and have a good season.
Thank you.
Thanks also, Rebecca, for your help too with all the policy stuff. I was just watching people to go to see if anyone, giving people a chance to leave their comments, or if it's any of these people who were left here had a last question, or if they've just abandoned their computers and don't realize it's still on. Okay, I think, thanks, Rebecca. I think I'm, oh, your mic is on, not on.
It's not on. Okay, yeah, I think that came out pretty well, that we achieved our goal of having kind of a minimum of things for Isaac to clean up later, and they are fairly minor things.
Mhm.
So I was trying to take notes, even though I know the recording will be there, but my thought is I'll go back into my original document and work from there, or do you want to grant me editing?